Japan is a fantastic country. It can feel like an amusement park for those who've never been here. Hell, it feels that way even after you move here. At least, for a while it does. Soon enough, you'll realize that Japan has changed around you. You look around at all the tourists scrambling over each other, having fun, trying to get a picture of that famous sign. You know the one. You've seen it countless times on your way to the bar after work. You know how happy you were to see it the first time. It doesn't quite feel like paradise anymore. But what you don't realize is that Japan hasn't changed. You have. By the fact that you clicked on this video, I'm guessing you're interested in moving to Japan. While there's plenty of things to love about this country, moving here is not something to be taken lightly. There's a whole host of questions you need to ask yourself, and the answers are going to differ for everybody. After watching this video, you might come to the conclusion that maybe living in Japan is not for you. And that's okay. You don't have to live here to experience all sorts of great things that Japan has to offer. Let's face it, no country is perfect, and Japan is no exception. But with that being said, let me tell you about some things that you need to be aware of before coming to Japan. Let's start with the elephant in the room. Everybody who wants to move to Japan has likely at some point or another been told about the work culture. Or rather, I should say, warned about the work culture. And for good reason. It's not pretty. Unlike back home where everyone promotes, independence and sticking it to the man and just looking out for yourself in general, Japan is the complete opposite. Japanese society puts enormous value on working together and, achieving a goal for the greater good. Think of it like this. Western work culture is more like a bear. We tend to just look out for ourselves and what's important to us personally. We'll interact with others if we have to, but we generally just tend to need to get something out of it. But Japanese society or work culture is more like a colony of ants. They will sacrifice their own well-being if it benefits the colony. In the workplace, you're expected to accept any invitation to go out drinking with your boss, even if you don't drink and even if you have plans for that night already. If you don't, then you may get passed up for that promotion you were hoping for. And before you clock out for the day, you gotta make sure your seniors or senpais have all already finished their work and clocked out first. This kind of thinking runs rampant through Japanese society. It's super mentally taxing, even for native Japanese people. So much so that they even have a word for it, karoshi, which in Japanese means death from overwork. You're expected to work long hours every single day, and it gets to the point where some people just can't take it anymore, and they unfortunately decide they need to step in front of a moving train. It happens far too often, and the work culture that drives people to this point is Japan's biggest problem, in my opinion. Dating. Honestly, this will depend quite a lot on how well you know the Japanese language, seeing as most people, Japanese or not actually, worldwide, don't really want to date someone who can't speak the same language as them. Much less somebody who refuses to even try to learn. Sure, you can find Japanese people who speak English, but that's the exception, not the rule. It's hard to say how easy or difficult it will be to find a significant other, since it varies so much from person to person. But one thing you're sure to encounter is cultural differences. Japanese people tend to be quite reserved and very against public displays of affection. What this means is that you'll rarely see anything beyond hand-holding in public, and chances are you won't get that hug goodbye if you're in a public area. I mean, I've been here about 2 years, and I can count on one hand how many times I've seen a couple do anything more than hand-holding in public. And if you have children together, she doesn't expect you to help take care of the child much, if at all, even if it would make her happier to have help. Relationships here are difficult, especially because of communication. Japanese is a very high context language, meaning you need to be able to interpret the correct meaning of every word just based on other context clues. And these clues don't even have to be said, they just have to be understood just knowing the, Japanese culture. If both you and your partner are both patient and willing to listen and work around these cultural differences, then you can make it work. But if you can't speak Japanese at all, or you're just starting to learn, it's going to be pretty difficult. When you're just starting to learn Japanese, at first communication is amazing and fun because you're only just starting to be able to communicate with people. Every new thing you learn is just one huge step forward. You improve your skills regularly and you're able to express more thoughts and more concepts in Japanese every single day. And it feels great. But eventually that energy starts to fade and frustration grows. There comes a point where you have a decent grasp on the language, and you're able to express your thoughts well enough to get by, but it feels like you just can't understand conversations half the time, and you can't convey your thoughts properly, and you have to look at a dictionary for the third time in 5 minutes. It'll get to a point where you'll have a decent enough grasp on the language to express your thoughts well enough to get by. But it feels like there are times where you just can't understand conversations half the time, or you just can't convey your thoughts properly, no matter how hard you try. And believe me, when you're N3, N2, N1 level, it's extremely frustrating because you feel like you should already know these words or these concepts, but you just can't put them into words. And it gets worse because you know you can't rely on translators for most things at this point, because a lot of sentences, like we discussed earlier, require a lot of context. And that's one thing translators are really bad at, is giving context, or knowing the context, I should say. Especially if it's for like a short sentence or like a couple of words. Translators, even the really good ones, are really bad at it. The only translators that even might work at that point is like a AI, and you have to preface it with the context before asking what the translation is. And that's a lot of work just to get one simple translation. And if you don't do that, all these translators just get the meaning entirely wrong. This language is so context heavy that your brain feels like it's working in overdrive just trying to keep up. And the frustration will build and build over time, and it doesn't get better for a long time. And the only way to make it better is studying more. A lot of people talk about the difficulty of making lasting friendships here in Japan as a foreigner. And it does have some truth to it. Ask pretty much any foreigner and they will tell you that at some point they've had a lot of trouble making friends, especially Japanese friends. We just didn't grow up with the same experiences, so it makes it a lot harder to connect. Most people, not just in Japan, tend to stick with the friends they made in high school, and don't often branch outside of that small group. This, coupled with the language barrier, just makes it that much more difficult if you don't or haven't been to school in Japan. It'll take quite a lot of effort, especially if you want to find friends who are not strictly interested in language exchange. Think about how difficult it is to make friends back home after college, and then double it because you only understand part of what everyone's saying here in Japan. Those are going to be the big issues, really, when you come to Japan, but that's not all of them. For example, things such as the weather. Most people who have lived in Japan any amount of time will tell you that they've experienced hearing other Japanese people say, oh, Japan has 4 seasons, or saying something like Japan is the only country that has 4 seasons, when it's not strictly true. Like, for example, I grew up in Southern California near LA, where we really only had 2 weather patterns, and that was hot and extremely dry, or a little tiny bit cold. And that was kind of it. I've got friends who grew up in or around Florida, and it's super humid over there over the summer. It's hot, sticky, disgusting. And they say that Japan's summers are definitely worse. Believe me, Japan's summers are bad. I'm not kidding when I say I have to change pretty much every single time I go out because it just gets that hot and sweaty. What I really want to do is get one of those fan jackets that you see sometimes wandering around. The summer's hot. The spring and fall are quite nice actually in temperature, and the winter does get pretty cold. In places like Osaka, it's pretty rare for it to snow, but there are other places throughout Japan where they get quite a lot of snowfall. Like, there's even, I forget the name of the town right now, but there is a town in Japan that does have the heaviest snowfall in the world. So yes, while Japan isn't strictly the only country with 4 seasons, it does have quite a variety of weather patterns. Though that doesn't make it any less annoying hearing it for the 100th time. There's also things to consider, like the economic state right now in Japan. But the yen is super weak and wages haven't changed in a long time, which means a lot of people have less buying power than they did years prior. And due to that, it is getting harder and harder for people who live here and earn their paycheck in yen. Life in Japan isn't all bad though. As long as you keep an open mind and communicate as best you can, Japanese people are incredibly nice and willing to work with you to make sure you understand each other. I mean, they've gained that reputation for a reason. People here are truly nice if they see you're trying your best to learn the language and act respectfully, and they will go to great lengths in order to help you out. For example, my first day in Japan, I was doing a college exchange program and I needed to find the dorms. I was on my way back from doing some grocery shopping that I knew I would need, and I couldn't find the dorms. So I found the office and I asked them in my painfully broken Japanese where I could find the dorm. As it turned out, I had wandered onto the wrong campus entirely. I didn't have my phone plan set up, so I couldn't get a map out and check where I was going, what I was doing. But one of the nice office members actually walked me like 15 minutes to the correct campus. That was amazing. I was flabbergasted. I will never forget that nice office lady. If not for her, then this channel might instead be called Lost in Japan. So just give it your best effort and you'll make it through. It'll be difficult, but as long as you keep working at improving your language skill and cultural understanding, you'll survive. At this point, you may have realized there's one overarching reason why life in Japan is so hard, and that's language. Learning Japanese is a huge boon, and when it comes to getting settled here in Japan, if you don't have a firm grasp on the language and an open mind, it's going to be hard. If you enjoyed watching this video, then consider subscribing to my channel or joining my Patreon, where you can help me decide what exclusive benefits you guys want as Patreon members. And of course, those of a high enough tier will get their names on the wall behind me. Right now, all I have is Tamba behind me. Click here to learn how to actually speak Japanese so you can make friends and make your life way easier when you move to Japan.